get started here, and,
Yep.
and I'd like to introduce you somewhat from what I know of you.
All
And
right.
if you feel anything that you want to add, you've already given some detail about your European experience earlier. If you want to add anything, uh, don't feel like you're being braggadocious. Not everybody knows you yet,
All right.
so we'll go from there. But
Absolutely.
I've met Wade
Hi,
Gugino.
people.
He's a local cartoonist in Holland, Michigan here, and I've met him when I was looking for a local artist for help at the Holland Civic Theater, and he put together one of our posters and was very successful. I enjoyed working with him, and through the process of working with him, I found out a little bit about him, and he's very talented, not only athletically, as he mentioned to me earlier today. He played 15 years of European basketball, and then I'm not sure how soon after. That's what I'm going to find out. But opened up his own shingle for applied cartooning, and has established himself locally here, uh, whether he might say it or not, as a bedrock of talent in Holland. I mean, you go into JP's, one of the local coffee places that's popular, and Wade's artwork is on the wall. Grand Rapids has their art prize every year, and for 3 years now, Wade has had an entry, which is a great representation for Holland. And if you want talent of art and I haven't played him in basketball, but probably basketball, you want to meet Wade.
That basketball is dwindling. I'm going to be 44 here shortly, and strangely, you don't jump as well at 44 as you did back at 26. But
Well, I'm 45, so
all right,
I could
you
probably
could feel
attest
that.
to that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've never jumped. So, how tall are you?
I am 6'9",
Okay.
and grew 8 inches during my junior year in high school. So I was kind of lanky and really not coordinated for a long time. So it took a bit for me to sort of move into my shoes for basketball. I didn't have too many options coming out of high school to play on a bigger level, and my brothers had come to Hope, and Hope had a good basketball program and good science program, which is what I originally started to study, and that's how I got to this area.
So you didn't live in Holland originally?
No, I grew up in Midland, Michigan. Actually, I was
Okay.
born in a place called Reese, which is a tiny little town. My grandfather and my uncle have been the doctors there for 70 years running, and my dad was born there as well, and he eventually moved away to Midland for a city administration jobs, or not administration, water plant job, and we moved to Midland and sort of grew up there. And then my oldest brother Todd really loved science, really loved basketball, and chose Hope as his destination. And then my next oldest brother and myself would come and visit him here, and so my next oldest brother came to Hope, and then I came to Hope, and it just was, we got to know this area very well. Todd, my oldest brother, was a real stalwart person in the area in the sense that he lived and breathed Hope College and knew everybody in the community and so on. And basically, my other brother Scott ended up finding his wife here, marrying, having his family here, and so on. So for me, it was just kind of a natural place to migrate to. They're a bit older than I am, so they had already started their normal family lives by the time I was coming in as a college student.
I read the article about you and Todd doing your combined teaching experience. So
You know what?
that was
He did some great camps at Hope College, and those are continuing on now. Just as a matter of mentioning, Todd passed away this past April. For folks who aren't aware of that, but still the camps are going on, and I continue to do the cartooning camps with it. Someday I'd love to see his camps go sort of franchised and go into other places, but that's a future goal, future plan.
and on a side note for Todd, it was cancer.
I was a blood plasma. It's treated like cancer. He had to have chemotherapy, but it was really an odd disorder that caused his bone marrow to make too much protein inside of some of the cells that they were producing, and that protein caused those cells to be stiff, and those cells were lodging in his heart, causing his heart to have less and less function. For different people, it can lodge in different organs, and the fact that he was diminishing in capacity in his heart, they couldn't really figure out what that was, because they aren't looking for this necessarily. They're looking for other things like occluded arteries or things along that line. And by the time they figured out what it was, he was quite advanced and had to go on a pretty heavy chemotherapy regime, and that just really took it out of him. He wasn't able to come back from the chemo. It was pretty tough. And he was on the road towards, if he had gotten the numbers down, which he actually, the day after he went unconscious, they found out that his numbers were low enough in order to say that he had stopped the blood plasma disorder, but it ended up that the chemo was shutting down the rest of his organs by that time. And so he passed on, but he would have had to have had a heart transplant, and it still would have been a very long road back to trying to get back to normal, and probably only would have lasted for 5 or 10 years. So in lots of ways, there was mercy in his passing, because he wouldn't have had to deal with the problem and the pain for 5 or 10 more years. But at the same time, when you're that close, you just wish, you know, that he would have turned the corner on it. But that's the long and short of it. But good legacy.
Sure.
He loved the school, loved the camps, loved the kids, and we'd like to carry that on in the future.
Excellent. Yeah, and from the article sounded like the kids were enjoying it. So.
The kids were what? I'm sorry?
The kids were enjoying it.
Oh, yeah.
So
Kids love the summer camps. Some folks have been coming back for years and years and years. And what's fun now is he's been doing them for like 15 or 16 years, and I've been doing cartoon camps for 13 years. Some of the kids that I started with are now like college kids when they were like little tiny ones, you know, and that's a fun thing to see. I had a kid do their graduation invitation for their graduation party for high school was the character that he developed in one of my cartoon camps, and so that's kind of fun. And then Todd gets tons more feedback from kids that said, you know, I never would have gone into science if it hadn't been for your camps and so on. So for me, that's a lot of fun. It's good to see that effect on future learners.
yeah, let me get back to the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry.
No, I'm definitely interested because I've met your brother, the glass guy.
Yep.
And I never met Todd, but like I said, I get familiar with him in the article. I knew he was sick, so
Right.
Interesting to hear. So
It's one of those things you just can't foresee, you know.
Yeah.
Live life every day because you never know when it's coming, man. You never know.
So not everybody goes into business for themselves.
It's true.
What was it in your life that triggered this option? You mentioned your stint in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
but what was it exactly? Where was the time that you realized you weren't going to be getting a 9-to-5 job at a factory or applying for a job at an office or something, or a career working for someone else? When was it that triggered in your mind, you know what, I'm going to do this for myself. I'm going to do cartooning, and I'm going to turn it into a lucrative business or a sustainable business. Was there a point?
Yes. Believe it or not, it was when I was 5. I have always wanted to be a cartoonist. And I played basketball because I knew that I wouldn't be able to play basketball later, and I enjoyed basketball, and I knew that I could put away money to be able to start cartooning. And I knew that cartooning is one of those gigs where for 5 years or for 20 years you might be eating grass in the backyard, and then something takes off and goes somewhere. So even though some of the things that I invested money into from basketball didn't pan out in the way that I would like, we still had enough money to get started and get moving and so forth. I had hoped that some of those things that I had invested in would bring me in a regular income so that cartooning would just be sort of cream of the crop on top of things. But I find that basically, you know, month to month, you're kind of like this, trying to pay the bills and so on. But I've always wanted to be a cartoonist, and when I was done playing basketball overseas in 2007, when we came home, I figured, you know, I can go and get a job, and I can start to build more money towards this and have a better cushion, or I can start doing what I've always wanted to do now. And if I'm ever going to do it, it's probably going to have to be now, because it's not going to start sometime later. And so really, from the time we came home in 2007, I just have been working on cartoons, and I thought that I knew a lot about it because I've been published in overseas publications, and I've seen how syndication works, and I've seen how different channels work for cartoon publishing. But for what I'm trying to do, which is apply cartoons to communication needs in other areas like business and education, healthcare, and so on, I really needed to learn this business a lot more, and it's been a long, slow road, but we're getting to the point where there are specific applications that really have a big future, and I'm kind of happy about that.
Now, even though you started with somewhat of a nest egg,
Mm-hmm.
you mentioned that it wasn't as big as you were hoping. So
Right, sure.
that probably opened up the opportunity for fears.
Oh, tons. And they're still there, you know. I mean, one of the things that you learn as you go on, especially if you haven't done this before, I mean, having played basketball for 15 years, you don't get the business side of life, so you don't know what's positive and what's negative all the time. You know, I spent 9 whole months at one point after I got home courting NASCAR through a couple of people that I knew because I thought that those would be great camps and a great application for cartoons, and we were looking at developing a graphic novel for them, only to find out 9 months into it that the people that I was working through were not representing themselves as truthfully as possible, and they didn't really have the connections within NASCAR that they said they had. So you're preparing all of this work and you're putting things together and you're presenting it to other people, and you're waiting for response because they're the ones who are presenting it to people, and you're getting nothing back and you're getting nothing back, and they thought that they might be able to use it to get some interest in things, but in the end you don't know if you don't have experience with business. I mean, I checked out the credentials as much as possible by calling NASCAR. I did a number of different things that would be considered due diligence, and those just didn't yield the information that I needed. And now I've got a fairly decent sense about whether or not people are who they say they are. I'm able to sort of figure that out, and I'm able to say this is an opportunity that's going to have a positive finish, and in other instances say, you know what, this is just one that I want to step away from and not be involved in at all. And that comes with experience. That, you know, different jobs that I took from people. Some of them, you know, promised the moon if you were able to accomplish this, that, and the other thing for them, and you'd accomplish it for them, and then something wouldn't work on their end, and you weren't able to get the moon. You know, you might get a pittance for the time that you put in on things, and all of that, as well as the best way of using cartoons to express ideas in different areas, in different people's area of interest, has been a huge learning curve, and one that was necessary for me to do what I need to do in the future here.
Let's take that to what you just said now, to a different realm. Say you, for example, your nephew happens to be playing basketball in Europe.
Right.
And he doesn't have all that experience of 15 years.
Right.
So you can give him some experience right up front and save him from a lot of pain and suffering. So let's go back to what you said. Now you've learned how to deal with those people or recognize them because of your experience. But if you had the chance to give someone that wisdom that doesn't have that experience on avoiding what you ran into,
right.
How could you package that of what to look for or what to ask when they're meeting a new client in order to avoid those pains?
I think that there are a lot of things out there that automatically already give you sort of, you know, look into people's background. There are lots of things that you can find out there that are going to be ways that would help you. And I would certainly love to, like my nephew does play overseas, you know, I sit down and I talk with him from time to time about, you know, this agent's going to ask for this, don't get locked in for that, and that sort of thing. Don't get locked in with one guy because then they don't do the work for you that you need unless they're, you know, a really high level person. In the end, there's really no teacher-like experience, although you do want to avoid big pitfalls. And I think in what I'm doing, there are probably specific applications of what I'm working on that I'll be able to teach other people to avoid this pitfall and avoid that pitfall. But by and large, I mean, business management has been figured out pretty well, and I'm probably not going to add an awful lot to that gamut of things other than to say, when people say you've got to be persistent and continue to work and continue to believe in your dream and continue to move forward even when other people don't see it, and half the time you don't say, you know, sometimes you're like, boy, am I deluding myself here? Is this really here or not? You just have to move forward. I move forward prayerfully. I happen to be a person of faith, and for me that really is the guide. If I say, look, I'm up against a wall, I don't know how to get past this wall, my family needs X, Y, or Z in order to continue surviving, I'm either going to have to find that elsewhere, or I'm going to have to find it in what I'm doing. You know, this is up to you, Lord, if you want me to move forward. And I have found that in every one of those instances, things just sort of fall out of the air, and not necessarily immediately the way that you want exactly, but something that will carry it to the next step, and something that will carry it to the next step. And so I just keep walking forward to the next step, which that's probably not in any business books. You're probably not going to get that one in any business book. I'm sure that they'll have, you know, numbers and stochastics and things like that that you can figure out in order to, you know, make your marketing better and, you know, reach your audience better and all of that sort of thing. But in the end, there's a certain part of it that is just not giving up. It's just not stopping. Now, there's a certain part of it, I'm sure, that there are some people who maybe don't have a solid business plan and maybe should give up, but or at least change the direction that they're going in, and that's when you have to also be lucid and listen to advice from other people as well.
from what you said, then it's possible you could have a chapter in a business book titled "Don't Give Up," and the essence would be, look, you're gonna fail. You're gonna have pitfalls.
Right.
Because people are going to take advantage of you, or they're not going to reveal their true connections. But if you've got, like for you, it was faith. If you've got a calling, if you've got a drive to succeed, don't give up.
Right. Right.
And take them into consideration that you're going to fail.
Right.
Or fall.
I think that's it. I think that in basketball, I failed a ton, and I just kept on going. And half of the Division I guys are guys who were weeding out of the CBA and the NBA that were coming overseas. They just didn't want to stay with it that long. So eventually you became the default guy. And perhaps that's not a strength or a talent or something along that line, but I find that staying long enough with what you do until you learn the business well enough in order to do what you doing at the best is something that isn't overrated. I mean, that's really where it's at, and sometimes that takes a very, very long time, and it's not just not giving up. It is, you have to be a little bit lucid about it and a little bit like you're, how can I say this? You have to listen to other people, but at the same time, you have to know in your heart what it is that you want to do. And if what they're saying is correct, you have to feed it into what's in your heart and move forward. I don't do this job because it's going to make $1 million or $1 billion or whatever in the future. I do this job because it's something that hasn't been done out there, and I really want to see it out there. And I know a number of other people who would like to see something that I'm building out there the way that it's being built. And the way that I'd like to grow it, I think, is going to have a positive impact. And so it's like anything else. I'm sure that there are numbers of things that would have been better for society that people tried to build and it just didn't work out, I mean, different kinds of cars or different kinds of transportation or whatever. But I think this is going to be really good in the future for everybody. And, especially with mobile devices and so on, being able to clearly and succinctly, concisely get your idea across to people with little visual packets that have just enough text to make people understand what you want and move them to the next level of what you're working on. That to me is a huge idea for the future.
Well, yeah, your talent and the skill of drawing and cartooning. Well, first of all, look at your bookshelf with all the books, but someone could belittle it and say it's just cartooning, but we wouldn't have multi-million-dollar movies nowadays if someone wasn't drawing Spider-Man 25, 30 years ago.
Well, absolutely. The thing that's nice about cartoons is that it pulls in, this is the area where I've done a lot of brain science on it, and why I think that it'll, brain research, on the science, and think that there's a real future for cartoons, and that is, 90% of the information that you pull in is visual, and the way that you categorize it in your brain actually sort of assimilates the way that your brain stores it, as far as people can tell up to this point, is in 2D sort of black and white images, which are very similar to how cartoons are produced. And then, of course, the different color patterning and everything else, and even some of the horizontal and vertical lines are stored in different areas, but it's remembered in sort of two-dimensional little snippets. Even your normal life memories are kind of remembered in two-dimensional little chunks like that. This is not absolutely confirmed, but this is the best research up to this point. The hypothesis is that's how it's stored, although it's stored in different parts of your brain, that it's synthesized in that way to help you remember. And to me, cartoons are exactly that. They take complex information and they simplify it down into a simple single frame, and they give you the infused emotion, which your brain reacts to. They give you the environmental background, which gives you sort of an idea of the placement of that idea or the context of the idea. And then usually there's some sort of word or text balloon that carries the idea further into somebody's cognitive thinking. And so to me, down the road, hands down, I think cartoons are going to be looked at less as kids' animation on Sunday mornings and more as something that can, if they're done right, really touch the emotion and the feeling of people and get messages across in a way that is quicker and more intuitive. And I could be a quack, but I believe that wholeheartedly based on what I've read.
I sense a TED speak coming from you.
It would be lovely to do that. I need a little bit more success with what I'm doing here in order to be taken seriously. But I think that that'll get to that point where it's at least an idea that is worth listening to. Whether or not it goes to a TED level, I have no idea. But that's not really my that's not my concern at the moment. I just want to make this
I would
start.
listen to it.
All right, excellent.
The whole concept is interesting. I want to go back to something you had said earlier. You were talking about listening. Obviously, your faith, and just let me give you a second, because people talk about faith and their Lord. You want to elaborate more on that? Because
Expound
it doesn't
on
have
that.
to be vague. But I want to go back to my main question is who is it that you listen to? Because you mentioned about listening to people,
Right.
hearing people and taking their advice. So I want to go back to that. But if you could briefly just elaborate on your faith and just, so it's not vague to people.
Right. First of all, I'm a Christian. I am probably one of the weird people out there that believe that the Bible is the Word of God. And I sit down and spend time in the Bible and have ever since I was a young kid, reading a chapter a day or sections in a day. And what I find is that the Bible is people say a living document, and that sounds kind of weird, or breathing document. But what I find is that there can be all sorts of things in the Bible that don't make an awful lot of sense until all of a sudden you apply them in an actual situation, and then there's kind of like a light turning on. And people will say at times, that's the Holy Spirit working in you to see in a certain instance the application of the Bible. But what I've found is that throughout my life in reading the Bible, the consistency of not only the prophecy and all the other historical background and facts that are in there, but the nature in which how can I say this, human nature fights against the idea of getting what it wants and then being in right relationship with others. I've never seen anything like the Bible at being able to sort of cut between the edge of what is right and wrong based on the idea of this sort of self-serving approach. And in the end, I had sort of in college, a questioning period in my life about, how can one person dying on a cross save a whole bunch of people from their sins? It just didn't make a whole lot of sense. A lot of people didn't have answers for me. And I ended up spending time searching out the answers for myself. And there are ever increasing levels of questions. But I find that when I prayerfully search for the answers to those questions, over a period of time, I find them, and they're entirely consistent with the Bible, and they're entirely consistent with my experience of God in my life. And that's the other side of things, is most people that don't approach God, I find, don't necessarily spend time with God. And my time in the morning or in the evening when I'm reading the Bible and praying, I can see God's work in my life. And there have been specific instances in my life very much where I had no control over certain things, and there was no way that something could turn out possibly well. And in those instances, circumstances changed entirely based on trusting God with it. And I've seen other areas where I said, you know what, God, I'm going to go this one on my own. I'm going to take this because how bad can it be? And it really, really turned out badly. And I mean like badly to the point where it pains me now over time to still deal with that. And you can't give that to another person, but when you live in relationship with God on a day-to-day basis, you start to see the areas in which you're trusting in yourself or in the world or in other relationships more than you're trusting in God. And honestly, he brings that to the forefront, and he has you wrestle with it and deal with it and wrestle with it and deal with it, and he'll keep you under for as long as it takes for you to start trusting him, because that's where he needs you. And not only that, it's where you're the happiest and where you're the best. And for me, the time over the past 6 years that I've been building this business has been a time where money has been an issue. It's strained my relationship with my wife. It's meant that some of the things that we'd like to have for our kids are not available there. I've got 4 kids, and you're always kind of like, am I being true to them? Am I being right to them? And in the end, like I said, each point where there's a real crisis, and I actually bring it to the Lord, he makes opportunities in order for things to move forward. And I believe wholeheartedly that he'll do that through until this business is what it's supposed to be in the end. Whether that's exactly what I envisioned or whether that's something entirely different. I mean, it's already changed in many ways, but I like the direction that it's heading. I just wholly 100% trust God and will trust him with the future of the business, whether that's to go great guns or whether that falls off the face of the earth at some point. And in the end, that's not always an easy thing, because on any given day I find when I'm tired, when I'm exasperated with people that I'm dealing with, when something is not working in the way that I would like, just, there's more problems with a project than I would expect, I find my natural tendency is like, I just got to go play the lottery. I need to make a whole bunch of money and not have all of this stress and not deal with this. And it's very funny to see how much that weighs on you when you're tired or when you're not feeling well or that sort of a thing, because it's really placing your trust in the money. And the money, it would be wonderful. It's a great tool. It would help you to accomplish certain things that you want to do, but it doesn't actually get you closer to God, who provides all those things, and it doesn't actually get you into a situation where you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And under these circumstances, I find that if I just kind of wait, if I pray, if I read the Bible, if I get some good sleep, a whole perspective on the direction that I need to be going in opens up. And that honestly has been sort of the saving factor of what I'm doing, because then you can, whether people say no to you about an idea, whether they say, you're out of your mind, or if they say, hey, we really like this, and then don't come through in the future as far as being a client or whatever, you can just blow it off or brush it off and go on to the next thing. And the next thing always seems to come, and the next thing always seems to come, and they always seem to be good things. So, I mean, probably more than any business advice that I could give you that you'd see on TechCrunch or on any of the other areas where, people are sitting down and saying, you need to use this, or you need to do that, or you need to employ this kind of a Six Sigma approach for management or that kind of a thing. I'd say God's in control, trust him. You have to do the work. You have to get out there and try, and he, lets you muddle around a little bit so that you learn, but you have to always come back and trust in him, and that'll move your business forward in the way it's supposed to move forward.
I appreciate that. And we could talk. I'll talk more about that later after we're finished.
Yep.
Maybe two other questions that I probably could still hit on that you might not have. Again, about if you could kind of tell a little more about who it was or how instrumental someone might have been as a business voice for you. Because if you said you've called your nephew and given him some advice about who to avoid and what how to keep him above water. Is there anyone from your beginning in 2006 or 2007 when you started,
right?
That you would say, I remember calling continually that person or asking them for business advice, or remember my wife did such and such for me and that really helped.
I gleaned a lot from a lot of different people. One of the things about having played basketball at Hope College is everybody seems to know everybody who plays basketball at Hope College. So already in Holland, even after playing overseas for a number of years, I had a lot of contacts with people that were sort of casual contacts, but folks that you could call on and say, what about this idea? What about that idea? We have some folks that live across our street that were real successful business folks, and I would bounce a couple of ideas off of that neighbor quite a bit, and he would give me some feedback. My brother Scott has had a glass business here in town for 20 years, and for probably 15 of those years, it's been great, and then it's been horrible, and then it's been great, and then it's been horrible, and everybody had real severe cutbacks in 2007 through 2009 there, 2010. And for him as well, because he's in the construction industry, all of the housing starts were way down. All of the, values of homes were going down. Nobody was buying new and nobody was building. And, he was down to just basic brass tacks at that point. And I would sit and talk with him, and he'd say, well, we're doing this, and we're doing this, and this is all we can do to move forward. And it would end up that I would ask him about different things, and he'd say, well, try this, this, and this. And my brother Todd, when he was alive as well, would say the same from kind of a nonprofit approach from the college. And he would put me in connection with a number of folks like that as well. But what I really liked about Scott, the glass business, was there were points at which, he was down to just himself and one or two other people in the office. And now they've got 25 or 26 people that work for them, and they have what's the word I'm looking for? Not businesses, but they have locations here in Holland and in Grand Haven, and they're starting to work towards one in Grand Rapids. And just seeing him persist, working with the banks, talking through things with people, and realizing that it's about servicing the client and dealing with the client more than it is about any magic business formula or management formula or anything along that line. That it is about giving people what they want, and then if they don't know what they want, trying to move them in a direction that is both profitable and at the same time interesting and in a way that they haven't looked at things before. And he does really cool stuff with glass, and so for me to see that and to know that my product, while it's something that's different than anybody else has seen out there, really needs to be approached from the standpoint of, this is really cool and you need to be doing it, as opposed to, hey, you know, this is a crazy cartoon approach, why don't we try this and see what happens? It's made a big difference to me to say that this business really has a position and it can move forward. And the more that I talk with other folks out there with different applications, there have been lots of folks in lots of organizations who've said, hey, have you tried this? Why don't you try this? This is really going well. I can see that you're moving in a good direction with this. And that's encouraging. It's that kind of business mentorship that I've had. But because it's a small operation, I don't have like accountants who need to be doing my books or things like that. Are we running out of battery? Are we running out of time?
No.
Sorry.
Well,
I told you I'm long-winded. It's
No,
just
that's
the way I
good.
am. You can cut,
I'm not
you know,
sure.
2/3 of any of this out.
It's still running, so.
All the ums you can get out of
No,
there.
no, that's the one other question, and you just started going into it, was where do you see, because you've mentioned about the future, about building it out.
Right.
Where do you see the future for
this?
Genius? Yeah.
Oh boy. I could take it out in layers, but basically right now, one of the applications that I'm working on is some industrial signage, and I've been doing this for a manufacturer of car parts in Grand Rapids. And basically they put big signs over top of each one of their work cells that give sort of a 10,000-foot overview of what that cell's supposed to do, and it has a caricature of the person who works there, and it's got the product that they're building their part for, and some other information about the rates per minute or rates per hour and that kind of a thing. Right. The signs basically, I feel, after talking with some folks in the food industry and some other engineers that do a lot on production floors, that these will have real value for management in the sense that they're easily able to identify different production lines on an agile work floor for workers, because they're sort of valued as part of the organization, having their caricature up there, as well as having easy instructions in case they move from one cell to another cell and they just look up quickly and say, okay, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. And for me, that kind of a product line can have applications across a number of different industries, particularly in manufacturing, but in food service and so on. And we were thinking about city administration as well, and some folks brought up general health care. Just for that one product line, I could see that having really a $1 million application, in the sense that, you know, you've got all of the clients, not all of the clients, but numbers of clients around the country, and each one of those places is making new lines of products. Each one of those places is they're bringing in new clients as well, and they're sort of finishing out old lines and then bringing them back into play later if the piece is the same. All of that requires regular upkeep. It's a little bit like you know, servicing IT or something like that. You're constantly coming in and upgrading people's signs. You're constantly coming in and working on it. So it's a reproducible business, but it's one that's an ongoing sort of a business. And that's one application. I think about insurance and I think about healthcare from the standpoint of reading through what your benefits are. And I could see how some simple visuals would make that so much easier for people to understand what their coverage is and what they're actually getting, or, you know, the rules behind what it is that they're supposed to be doing. In the long run, I want all of this, and this is maybe my mistake coming back home, I want all of this to be a tool online. I'd like to create software that allows people to create the visual layouts that they want and give them tools that will allow them to express clearly what it is that they want their communication to be, so that it's not my business necessarily doing it all the time, although we'll offer that. I want people to have the tool to be able to do that themselves, and I've got ideas on how to build that and put that together, but that's a starting out, that's probably about a $2 million build, and I haven't been able to convince anybody that $2 million is worth throwing at a cartoon application. And that partially is the timing from when I came home in 2007. Again, everything was kind of tanking and cartoons were not first on people's list. But beyond that, being able to sit down and show them the breadth of what that tool would be able to do in the actual market and grow with, I just haven't been able to articulate that well enough. So I've taken 2 or 3 aspects like the industrial signs and now some preschool children's books that teach character and school readiness objectives. And I'm saying these are areas that cartoons can be applied to tangibly. These are the kinds of revenues that those can bring in. Now let's start building a studio that is able to apply these in a broader sense, and then beyond that, I'd like to be able to build an internet tool that allows other people to build those in a broader sense. So that's the long-term crazy goal of Gugenius.
Maybe after your TED Talk.
After my TED Talk, that's right.
$2 million won't be so big,
Hopefully by the time the TED Talk comes around, we will have made the $2 million, and then we don't have to go to anybody else.
Well, no, I appreciate your time. And, yeah, I didn't have a lot of questions, but I did have things that you've answered, and I didn't even have to ask.
Well, I apologize that, again, I'm very verbose. I'm sorry about that. It's just the way that I am. People ask me one question, and there's like 6 different areas that sort of feed into that, and it just takes a while to get all those understood by people, and probably they don't care, but it helps me categorize my thinking.
No, I think I could put together, if I had time, if I could sit down and extrapolate from what you had talked about, I could put together a pretty decent business article based on what you said.
Cool.
So
Well, I'm
I
glad.
appreciate your time.
Folks, Idea Dots, man. It's going big. That's the other one. Gugenius, buy stock. Idea Dots, buy bigger stock. Taking off.